Hi everyone and welcome back to our video lecture series on practical techniques for science communication. I'm Ellie and you might remember me from the first video in this series. I'm the engagement officer at IBE. Today's video will be all about designing visual or graphical abstracts, and I'll explain how you can take complex or longer scientific papers and concepts and translate them into accessible visuals that will resonate with your audience and bring them up to speed with essential information that may or may not be accessible to them, be that because of paywalls, jargon, or simply that reading a plain text article or summary is not always the most engaging way to get information across. And Marie's previous video in this series covered the power of using visuals in your science communication work, and in this video we'll build on those principles and how to put them into practice using a single eye-catching image. If you haven't watched the previous videos in this series, I'd suggest catching up on those, as they do contain information and concepts that I'll build on here. So without further ado, I'll get started. So firstly, what is a visual abstract? A visual or graphical abstract is a concise, visually engaging summary, usually of a research study, designed to communicate the key findings and implications in an easily digestible format. It typically includes a combination of images, icons, diagrams, and minimal text to distill complex information into a single accessible image or series of images. Visual abstracts can really support your written science communication work in areas like public advocacy and patient education or fundraising efforts, because there's a huge body of evidence that suggests that using imagery when communicating science is one of the most effective ways to convey information and to support your audience's understanding and engagement. They're more shareable, which is important in the digital age, because they can be shared on social platforms and printed as posters or leaflets. And they're also known to enhance memory retention because they combine text and imagery, which increases how likely your audience will be to recall the information that you've conveyed. So let's have a look at an example. Here's a paper that was published a few years ago in the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report from the CDC by Chan et al. It's a report on active epilepsy and seizure control in adults, and the report's relatively short and digestible. However, the body of the report is plain text, and it contains a lot of statistics, a lot of references, and some jargon. So while it's comprehensive, it requires time and effort to digest, especially for individuals without a scientific background. And as you can see here, they've written a plain language summary of the background and the key findings and the implications of the report. But look at what happens when they put that information visually. It conveys the pertinent information of a several thousand word long report into something that grabs the attention and can be digested in about 20 seconds. So what have they done here? So firstly, we'll talk about the writing, because there is still usually some writing involved in putting together a visual abstract. The report's title was Active Epilepsy and Seizure Control in Adults, United States 2013 and 2015, and they've titled their visual abstract, When Seizures Don't Stop. So what they've done here is taken that longer, more dry title, and while it suits a more traditional scientific audience and displays the who, the what, the where and when of the report, they've turned it into a much snappier, more compelling phrase that also carries some emotion. It's a really effective hook, as there's an implicit question here that they're telling you the graphic is going to answer. We talked a little about hooks in the video lecture on writing compelling content, and this here is a great example of that. They've drawn out the most important question that the report answers and thought about the longer piece of writing in terms of drawing out the things that will be most relevant to their audience. So next is how they've distilled their key findings into really very little text. So you can see along the top here below the title that they've selected the 3 key sections for the information that they want to convey and stripped those sections back to the bare minimum. So looking at this first section here, epilepsy is common. That section title expresses a key point, but then they've gone ahead and added some numbers to back that up. The paper itself had many numbers and statistics, but here you can see they've picked out 2 key stats to display, the 2 that they've deemed the most important to provide background on the topic, which is how many adults are living with epilepsy in the USA and what proportion of those adults still have seizures. So firstly, these stats are an easy to interpret way to define the parameters of the report and make it clear that this information pertains to this specific population, but also they're giving the audience the rationale of the report. It gives the audience an idea of the scale of the problem, which makes them more likely to be invested. Now, in the middle, a specialist can stop seizures. This is the next piece of the puzzle that builds on the background information. They've told us the context of this work from that section title on the left, Epilepsy is Common, and now they're telling us something specific from the report. And here they've used statistics slightly differently. So this statistic is highlighting an issue or a disconnect. This section is essentially saying, we know that seeing a specialist can help stop seizures. However, a large proportion of adults with epilepsy didn't see a specialist in the past year, which is one of the key points of the report. And that lays the groundwork for the third section, which is their conclusions or their specific recommendations or solutions. And they've worded this as adults with uncontrolled seizures should, and then they've written out short bullet points of recommendations which summarise the take-home messages of that report. So in terms of structure, you can see the skeleton of a conventional piece of writing here. It's got a title, which also serves as a hook. It's got background information, it's got key findings, and it's got a solution or a conclusion. And you can see they've tailored it with a non-expert audience in mind, using no jargon and short, simple, clear sentences. They've used numbers and statistics sparingly but wisely to support their points. So that's the written part, which is usually the first step when making a visual abstract like this. However, it can sometimes need refining once you've put the visual aspects together. For example, you may find that once you put the text into a design, that it's still too many words to be readable in a picture format. If this is the case, you can practice cutting down phrases and reducing excessive detail whilst retaining the meaning. So now let's talk through the visual techniques. Continuing to use the example of the CDC piece, they've used something called a visual hierarchy. And what this is essentially a deliberate arrangement in space of the elements in your design, like the text size, colour, spacing and imagery, to guide the viewer through this information logically. This can be as simple and obvious as placing the title in large bold at the top of the page. And it's also more subtle but still intuitive, such as laying the information out left to right. So even though there are 3 distinct boxes in this example, each containing a discrete package of information, the human eye tends to look at images from left to right, just as you do when reading, in most languages that is. So by placing the background information to the left, the key findings in the middle, and the solutions on the right, they're ensuring that the viewer follows their flow and digests the information in order. And this has been further emphasised and supported by the addition of these arrows pointing from one element to the next to help guide the eye. Other ways that they've used this visual hierarchy is by placing their subheadings at the top of each section and putting them on different coloured backgrounds to the rest of the section to clearly identify them as subheadings of separate sections. And on the left here you can see how they've used text size and colour to enhance the statistics so that the numbers stand out and stick with the viewer. We can also look at the way that they've used colour. They've chosen a colour scheme which matches their branding, which makes it cohesive with their other content and makes it more likely that people will register it and associate it as being an output of the CDC, even without them putting their logo on there. They've used different tones within that blue colour scheme to separate the different sections, and they've used a contrasting white cream colour between the 3 segments to clearly show that split of information. They've used coherent colours throughout, so the whole image doesn't look too busy or too colourful, like the purple in the brain, and also using that as the background for the subheadings, and then also as the border for the icons here on the right. The use of purple here is also a really identifiable way to distinguish this as a piece of information on epilepsy. And this cream colour has been used throughout the sections as the highlight colour, so the visual abstract doesn't appear too dark and the whole thing looks cohesive and professional. And as for the imagery itself, they've gone for simple, iconographic, but not childish images. So on the left there's that simple image of a brain, and in the middle there are two healthcare professionals, which ties in well with the content of that section, which is about epilepsy specialists. And then along the right, to support their bullet points, they've used specific icons relating to each point in those bullet points, which will help the viewer to strengthen their associations and recall of those points, as well as making the most text-heavy segment of the abstract look more visually appealing. The images are simple enough to be identifiable in a small format like on mobile, but they're still appropriate for an adult audience. They're not cartoonish or unrealistic, and they fit seamlessly into the graphic design of this image. In terms of shape, dimension and formatting, they've chosen a landscape image, and it's not too wide. This image could be viewable on a computer screen, on a phone screen, or as a printed poster or handout. Its dimensions make it shareable on social media and really easy to incorporate onto a web page. And this is a really important consideration for anything visual that you're putting out. Does it work with the platform or format that you've chosen? And there are some brilliant free tools that you can use to bring visuals like this to life, especially if you don't feel that graphic design comes naturally to you. Canva, for example, has a free version, and you can choose from a ton of dimensions and formats, and it even has templates that you can use as a starting point. There's a wealth of copyright-free imagery on sites like Unsplash, Adobe, and on Canva itself. And if you're struggling with a colour scheme, you can use Canva and even Google or an AI tool for inspiration on complementary colours if you aren't working within brand guidelines. If you need to create more scientific graphics, BioRender has a free plan, and this is more tailored to scientific content than other graphic design software, so this can be really useful if you need to include more technical imagery like proteins, cell diagrams, animal models, or if you need to tailor your content with visual representations of data or statistics. And then you can export your visuals as PDFs or high quality PNG images so they can be used in whatever way you need them. Okay, so I've just run through the basics of creating visual abstract with you, and now I want to try and build my own visual abstract based on the information in this video. I'm going to try and distill everything I've said in this video so far down into one short visual, and I'll explain why I'm doing things as I do them. So firstly, for a title, I think I'll keep it simple with designing visual abstracts. Just does what it says on the tin. Next, I need to turn all that background information that I gave you into something short and snappy that sums it up. Visuals increase engagement. And maybe I'll throw a statistic in there to strengthen it. Data shows 80% of people are more likely to read content that contains visuals. And I'll put that on the left as it's my background information. Next, maybe I want the key point of this video to stand out. My take-home message to you is designing visual abstracts is simpler than you may think. And I've shown you that in two ways. So firstly, by breaking down how to write a visual abstract, and secondly, by breaking down how to put one together visually, i.e., what should I write, what should it look like? So for how to write it, I'll give you my main points as really short, concise bullet points, and the same for what it should look like. And now I think the only information I'm really missing writing-wise is what I told you about platforms that you can do this on. So I'll put that along the bottom as a top tip. This might be a good place if you're making a visual abstract of a paper to cite your source or to tell people where to find further information. Now let's bring that to life visually. I'm going to make the important text bold and underlined where relevant. And I'm going to make my colours tie into the branding of my organisation, IBE, which is a lot of purples and some dark red. And I'm making sure if I have a dark background that the text is light and vice versa. Now for some imagery, let's make that 80% statistic stick out with a pie chart. There's not much I can do visually when it comes to this what should I write piece, so let's just put something simple in which looks natural in the space and brings some colour through. So let's put that pen in there. And then for the what it should it look like section, I'm going to add some icons to illustrate the key points I was making. And to help guide the viewer's eye where I want it to go, I'll add some arrow motifs through the whole image. I've made sure my boxes are evenly spaced so it's nice to look at, and luckily Canva and other platforms help you do that by telling you when certain elements are in alignment with each other or when they're the same size. And I'll finish it off with my organisation's logo, and voila, there's a visual abstract of the video that you've just watched. Now, I don't have incredible graphic design skills. I'm just using the tools that I have, which are fairly simple and rudimentary, but I enjoy using them and I enjoy getting creative. However, if you do feel like you struggle with the creative or visual side of things, I really don't want you to feel like you can't do this sort of science communication work. The tools I've talked about have really good templates which you can use as a starting point for creating your own. You can see here that I've searched on Canva, infographic and graphical abstract, and loads of great example templates have come up. I can do the same on BioRender. There's a whole load of templates where someone has already gone to the hard work of making it look pretty, so you just need to put your own information or data in there and personalise it a little bit. You can also look for examples of the kind of visual abstract that you might like to create and use those as inspiration or a jumping off point. And hopefully you can see from this video why visual abstracts might be effective. They're compelling and attractive, and they're ultimately designed to make science more accessible and appealing. I hope you found something useful in this video, or if you weren't listening, I hope you find some use for the convenient visual summary that I've made for you. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.